Let's talk about the books that I read in July. Hey pals, Alicia here. Welcome to my channel. And if you're new here, this is the place where we talk about books. Today I'm going to go over my July wrap up, all the books that I read in July. July was an exceptional reading month for me. I participated in the fuckathon hosted by Noria Reads and absolutely nailed it. I also did the reading rush where I borrowed some books from the fuckathon and also nailed that too. July was just really good for reading. I read 12 books in July, and let's just go over those books. So like usual, I'm going to go through the books in the ranking order from lowest rating to highest rating. There was really only one book this month that I genuinely did not like, and then everything else is in the 3 to 5 star range. So let's just get into those books. So the first book that I have to share with you today is Bina by Anakana Schofield. This was published in 2019, and I read this book for the fuck ageism prompt of the fuckathon. And I genuinely did not enjoy the reading experience of this book. To be honest, I should have DNF'd this book within like the first 50 pages, but I'm a stubborn bad boy. And I just have a real problem with DNFing, so I feel like I'm just like not even gonna do this book justice because I hate reading it for like 80% of it. So Bina is about a 75-ish-year-old Irish woman, and the whole novel is told in these kind of like bite-sized like napkin scrawl ideas, and I hated that bit of it because it was so repetitive. And I do get that this book is about Bina, and she's angry about how her life is kind of on this decline. She's just lost her best friend, so she's sad about that. Her nephew has kind of come into her life and is taking advantage of her home, her hospitality, and her life. And it's so repetitive. I hated the reading experience. From like the reading experience, this was a 1-star book for me, but I gave it 2 stars because I felt like this very specifically did deal with the topic of ageism, which was what I was reading it for. But the writing, the delivery, the repetition, it just wasn't for me. So if you are interested in very like stream of consciousness narratives where you're following a character, it's all about character and less about plot. Like if you're looking for something where you're gonna have all your questions answered at the end, absolutely do not read this. But if you're interested in a conversation with an old, angry Irish woman, then maybe you would like Bina. I don't have much more else to say about it because it just really wasn't for me. I gave this 2 stars, but like also kind of 1 star. do with that what you will. Next up, I have a science fiction book. I have Waist Tide by Chen. This was published in Chinese in 2013 and then translated into English by Ken Liu in 2019. And this is a science fiction dystopian story that I read for the fuck capitalism prompt of the fuckathon, and this was exactly perfect for that prompt. So Waist Tide is set in a future of China. I'm imagining it is probably like 100, 200 years from now. And capitalism is bad. Capitalism just gets worse. There is a new island that citizens live on. It's called Silicon Isle, and it is technically part of China, but it's kind of run as an independent state by these 3 almost like gang style families. And the whole concept of Silicon Isle is that people live on it. They have lived on it for generations, hundreds of years, and they are essentially living on an island that is made of trash. Silicon Isle is just a trash heap. And the citizens who live on it, they're called waste people, and their entire existence is just processing this waste under the rule of these 3 clan families. And they are not even treated as people. They're essentially treated as slaves, as cogs in a wheel, all making these 3 families money while they make nothing and are just, yeah, they're being used as tools. So it's like a pretty heavy-handed metaphor for capitalism, classism, and I loved that part of it. I loved the storytelling in this. I loved the actual kind of narrative flow of this was exceptional. It read very much like a dark thriller. You're kind of following 4 or 5 different characters at different pieces of this world, and they're all in different levels of status. You're following like a waste girl named Mimi. You are following an American man who's coming to Silicon Isle to make like a shady business deal. You're following one of the clan leaders. You're following a diaspora Chinese man who's coming back to Silicon Isle to kind of reconnect with his roots. So you're getting like a very fleshed out idea of this world, which I thought was super cool. The one thing that I did not like about this book is that one of the central character in this is a waste girl named Mimi, and she is so important to the plot. The entire book, the entire everything surrounds this character. I just hated how she was treated as a character, both in writing and action. She is like that character who has all the power and is never given any real agency or voice. I always hate that with female characters in science fiction, where everything just kind of keeps happening to them against their will, and they have no say, they have no action. They are very weak characters, even though they're developed as like very powerful characters. Like think like Lilu from The Fifth Element. That was very Mimi-like in this. And I found that kind of disappointing. But this was cool. It was like a mix of science fiction and fantasy and horror. There was a lot of very like violent pieces in this that I was not expecting, that just like very much caught me off guard. Also, cyborgs. I really enjoyed this. I did have some problems with it. I gave this 3 stars. Next up, I have a really short novella. I have The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This was published in 2019, and I read this for a few of the Reading Rush prompts. And The Test follows a man, an Iranian immigrant who's coming to the UK, and he is sitting for the British citizenship test so that him and his family can become British citizens. And it's like a 25-question test where once you do it, you pass it, you are now a British citizen. Like what could go wrong with that? Well, it does. Something goes weird, something goes strange. This is very much a Black Mirror style science fiction dystopian story. It was fun. While reading it, the plot did feel very familiar to me. If you are familiar with the Milgram experiment, that is very much reflected in The Test. Also, if you are familiar with the movie Cabin in the Woods, really you get those vibes reading The Test. I definitely enjoyed this. It was a fun, short, little novella. I didn't feel like there was anything super original with it. It didn't blow me away, but I enjoyed it. I gave this 3 stars. I read it in like just over an hour. So if you're looking for a fun little like speculative story that's just gonna make you be like, oh, The Test is a good choice. Next up, we have a super fun little slasher. We've got Camp Slaughter by Sergio Gomez. This is a self-published book by this author, and I read this for the fuck book elitism prompt. I read it for, you know, heck off people who look down upon self-published books. And I'm really glad I read this. This was a lot of fun. This was a good summer slasher. So Camp Slaughter is following a couple of groups of people who are all going into this forest to rent a cabin for a summer getaway. And there are these cabins in this wood, in this like wooded area, but elsewhere in this wooded area, there is an abandoned summer camp called Camp Lakewood. And everybody's kind of forgotten about Camp Lakewood. Nobody even really cares about it. However, when people come and rent these like adjacent cabins in the woods, sometimes they go missing. Sometimes they die. Sometimes there's just blood. And you're like, what's going on? Nobody knows. Bodies are never found. People are never found. So people just keep renting these cabins for some reason. And so a group of teens go to one of these cabins. Some investigators go to these cabins. And then elsewhere in the woods, a fiendish person is lurking with insidious intent. So this was a very gory, fun slasher. It didn't change my life. It wasn't the best slasher I had ever read, but you know what? That doesn't matter. It was a fun slasher. I also loved that in some of the chapters of this book, you are following the bad person, and you are like within this person's head. And I kind of enjoyed hanging out with the villain. Those were my favorite chapters to be in, and I just wanted to keep going and being there with that person. So yeah, check out Camp Slaughter if you're just looking for a fun, bloody, gory, stabby slashy time. If you do not like cannibalism, don't read this. Camp Slaughter, I gave it 3 stars. Next up, we've got a nice little YA contemporary romance. We've got Pride by Ibi Zoboi. I read this for the fuck gentrification prompt. This is a retelling or a remix of Pride and Prejudice. So it's kind of similar in storyline to Pride and Prejudice, but it's entirely different characters, entirely different place, entirely different time. This is set in Brooklyn. We are following a teenager named Zuri, and she's living in a community that is very rapidly gentrifying around her. A lot of the buildings across the street have been torn down, and then these big, beautiful, new, expensive like brownstones are going in. So Zuri and her family are kind of watching as this rich family, or rich-looking family, moves in across the street. It is the Darcy family, and Zuri immediately eyes up Darius Darcy, one of the sons, and it's, you know, it's your Pride and Prejudice hate to love romance that also very specifically has conversations about gentrification. I feel like it kind of picked up on the classism conversations in Pride and Prejudice and really made them more meaningful, dealing with, in like modern day, also talking about gentrification. And I thought that was super cool. This book is quite short, so I was very jolted by the hate to love trope. I felt like it needed a little bit more time to steep. It was like, I hate you, Darius Darcy, and then 10 pages later it was like, but I actually love you. It was just very abrupt. And I mean, you know what's coming. I knew it was coming. I knew it was gonna happen. I just wish it steeped a little bit more. It just felt quite rushed. But the characters were cool. I love the Darcy family. I love Zuri and her sisters. It was a fun little YA romance. Nice for a little sitting in the sun break. I gave this like a 3.5 stars. Next up, we've got another romance rom-com style book. We've got The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This was published in 2018 and I read this for the fuck slut shaming prompt, and this was just a perfect pick for that. So The Kiss Quotient follows Stella. Stella is an econometrician, which is kind of math and stats and marketing all kind of mixed together. She's an exceptional mathematician. She has Asperger's. She is career driven. She is just the best at what she does in her field, but she has never really prioritized romance, sex. It's just never really been a priority for her. And now that's what she wants, but she doesn't know where to start. So she hires a sex worker, Michael Fan, to teach her how to be good at sex. So that's kind of the conceit of this book, and it goes from there. This is a very sex positive book, both in terms of, you know, Stella becoming very comfortable in her own body and what she wants and what she needs, and then also Michael being a sex worker, and he is in some way like not very comfortable with the work that he does. Like, he doesn't like the people in his immediate life knowing about it, but I felt like it was pretty positive around the topic of sex work. This book was a lot more erotic than I was expecting it to be. This is erotic with a capital boner, and I really enjoyed that. It was really good. It was really fun. I gave this 4 stars. It was very fun. Next up, we've got another little novella. We've got The Black God's Drums by Djèlí Clark. This was published in 2018, and I read this for the fuck theological fundamentalism, fuck religious intolerance prompt. I actually read 2 books for this prompt this month. This was one of them, and this was really good. This is a steampunk, Afrofuturism, science fiction, weird fiction story. This is set in a future New Orleans, but I guess like the world kind of went a much different way after the American Civil War, and there's still like airships, there's still blimps. It's very like steampunk future, and we are following a young teen named Creeper, and her dream is just to be a crew on one of these airships, and tries to sleuth her way onto one of these airships called the Midnight Robber. She kind of uses her creeping spying ways to get secrets and then use them to gain you know, advances in her life, and she wants to get onto the Midnight Robber airship by using a secret that she tells this captain to get on. And it was a lot of fun. This book was so much fun. And Creeper has a secret gift where she is, I don't want to really say possessed, but she has within her an Orisha deity goddess named Oya. She is the goddess of, she's the Orisha of wind and storms who speaks to her. And so this has like a really cool conversation around religion and speaking to your god, having your god speak through you, and what that means. So Creeper has this Oya Orisha within her that talks to her, and then also the captain of the Midnight Robber, she also has an Orisha within her, and then the novel kind of goes from there with them and their deities and all of the like cool steampunk war stuff going on elsewhere. It's really short, so you only really get a glimpse of this story. So I really wanted more. This book is steampunk. This book is action-packed, and also it's queer. This is a very queer book, and I loved that too. Reading this it really reminded me of China Miéville. So if you like China Miéville and are looking for another author who writes that kind of weird steampunk alt future books, check out Djèlí Clark. I gave this 4 stars. Next up, we've got The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This was published in Japanese in 2003 and then translated into English in 2009. And I read this for the fuck ableism prompt, and I loved this book. This was actually the first book that I read in July, and it really just like set me up on the right trajectory. So The Housekeeper and the Professor is a beautiful little literary tale of friendship. We are following a professor who is in his 60s, and 20 years or so earlier in his life, he was in a car accident that left him with a pretty significant brain injury, so he only has an 80-minute memory. So he has lived with this like almost memento style memory reset every 80 minutes for the last 20 years, and he is being taken care of by his sister-in-law. And then his sister-in-law is much older than him even still, so hires housekeepers to come and take care of this professor. So this housekeeper, she comes in, she is like the 10th housekeeper to have been on rotation to take care of this man, and she can't really figure out why there's been so much turnover. And so she kind of comes into his life, and just the friendship that ensues from there. This book was so tender. It made me really emotional. Not only is it about the friendship between the housekeeper and the professor, but also the housekeeper, she brings her son to the professor's house sometimes because she is a single mother, so she brings her son with her, and the professor calls her son Root, like for the square root. And the friendship between the professor and this Root, the son. This book is about friendship, it is about math, it is about baseball. You learn a lot about baseball in this book, and it was just so beautiful. It was also very kind of believable around the treatment of the professor and his brain reset, his memory reset, and how one would respond to that. It goes much into the like kind of depression that he has, where he obviously doesn't remember anything outside of these 80 minutes for the last 20 years. He has like the long-term memory of before his accident, but then the last 20 years is only really in these 80-minute increments, and how every time his brain resets, the fear and anxiety and depression that is immediately present there. I just felt like this book was so gentle in how the characters treated each other, but without compromising those real human emotions. I loved this, and I gave this 4 stars. Next up, we've got a memoir. I read Black Klansman by Ron Stallworth this month. This was published in 2014, and I read this for the Fuck White Supremacy prompt of the Fuckathon, and I also read this for a few prompts in the Reading Rush. This was awesome. I had already seen the movie Black Klansman, and so this was the source material that kind of fleshed out the rest of that story, and I loved it. If you have Scribd, listen to this on audio, because the audiobook is narrated by Ron Stallworth, and that does so much to round out the story. So if you aren't familiar with Black Klansman is Ron Stallworth's memoir of his life in the 70s, where he was the first Black detective in Colorado Springs, in the Colorado Springs Police Department. And so he at once talks about the, systemic racism that he faced as a Black man joining the police force in the 70s amongst his peers, but then also from the world as well. And one of his undercover jobs that essentially framed the trajectory of his life, his career, is he responded to an ad in the newspaper that was soliciting people to join the KKK. So he responded to this by phone, and ended up, over the course of months, infiltrating the KKK via the telephone to learn secrets, to learn information and to, you know, thwart KKK initiatives and events. So it is at once kind of funny that you have this like black man joining the KKK. He actually got like a KKK membership card and everything, but also absolutely horrific. He even had phone conversations with David Duke, which is like, he's obviously making fun of these people. This book is very much making fun of how dumb white supremacists are, but also with this very underlying thread of just absolute horror. So read this book to find out how Ron Stallworth infiltrated the KKK and learn about what they did to subvert the KKK. So definitely recommend this. Love it. Watch the movie as well. The movie is great. I gave this 4 stars. So next up we have a short story collection. We have Song for the Unraveling World by Brian Evenson. This was published in 2019. And this is a generous collection of about 20-ish short stories. And I absolutely loved this. Brian Evenson writes dark fiction, he writes horror, he writes crime, he writes supernatural, like science fiction, dark fiction, and I don't even really properly know how to categorize this collection of stories, but only to say that I was obsessed with this. His writing is just absolutely perfect in my opinion. So I don't even know how to properly like articulate this, but you know when you're listening to a good song and you get like the goosebumps, you get frisson. I definitely have that experience when I am reading, but I had that experience the entire time reading this book. Almost like I had ASMR. I was getting ASMR vibes the whole time I was reading this, which is weird because a lot of these stories are super dark and super weird and super scary, but I just loved it. I almost felt like this like weird nostalgia and comfort reading this collection, even though I had not read it before. I think that just means I was really like vibing with his writing. Like I absolutely loved this, and I am just now gonna go out and buy every other book I can find by Brian Evenson because this was so good. There were 3 stories in particular that were like 5-star stories that I just will go back and reread. One of them was called Sisters, and that is about these 2 almost like ghosts, 2 ghost style sisters that are possessing people on Halloween. It was really sad, but also scary and wonderful. One was called Room Tone, and that might be my favorite one in this collection, and that is about a man who is a filmographer, director, video director, and he is renting a house only at night between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. to film a movie, and then the stuff that ensues from there. And then the third one is called A Disappearance, and it is about a man whose wife goes missing on the beach one day, and he is basically in mourning for a year because everyone assumes that he killed his own wife, but he's like, I didn't. She just went missing. And then what kind of goes from there. I absolutely loved those 3 stories. They're dark, they're scary, they're grim, they're so supernatural, but also just like, they got me high. These stories got me high, guys. I loved them. I gave this collection like 4.5 stars because it's really hard to rate short story collections because like you've got your exceptional standout ones, but then you've always got 1 or 2 that are just, you know, kind of okay. So high 4, 4.5, loved this. And then we've got 2 5-star books. Again, another month with a couple of 5 stars. So we are just we're just having a great time. So the first 5-star book that I read in July is We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib, a queer Muslim memoir. I read this one also for the fuck religious intolerance, fuck theological fundamentalism prompt. This is a memoir of Samra Habib's life. She grew up in Pakistan. She is Muslim, and their family had to leave Pakistan. They fled in the 90s and came to Canada, living in Toronto. So I think she came to Canada when she was around 10 years old. Samra Habib is a lesbian woman, she is a queer woman, but it really took her until she was in her like 20s, like mid to late 20s, to even kind of be aware of what her sexuality was, because her religion and her life up until that point was just, she wasn't even aware that she existed the way that she felt. Like, her religion was not telling her that she existed. So this is such a beautiful story, because it is at once about finding herself and embracing herself and being proud of herself and really trying to like break free from, I don't want to say the shackles of her religion, but to kind of break free of the limits that she felt were set for her and her family felt were set for her, but also still being very proud in her faith. Like, Samra Habib kind of lost her religion for a while when she was, you know, trying to reach out and explore and find herself, but then very specifically coming back to her religion and being a proud Muslim, identifying the way that she does. And I thought that was really powerful and really beautiful. In Samra Habib's life, she is also an artist, she's a photographer, and she shot a series of photos and interviews with queer Muslim people around the world. She traveled around the world and took photos and interviews of these people who identified as Muslim and also queer. And depending on the place that she went, sometimes they were a lot more open about sharing who they were. And then in some places she was able to take photography, but while also hiding this person's identity, because it may not have been safe for them to be outed as a queer person. So you can actually go online and find that photography collection, which I did right after reading this, and they are beautiful photos and beautiful interviews and stories. Very brave, very beautiful. And I really loved the writing, I really loved the voice. I also liked how much the story went into her childhood, growing up in Pakistan, you kind of going through the process of an arranged marriage and what that did to her emotionally and psychologically, but also how she was able to delicately find her own way, and the kind of just unconditional love and understanding of her family was really beautiful and really wonderful to see. So I absolutely love this and highly recommend this to anybody who's interested. And finally, the last book I have to share with you today is How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. This is a memoir that was published in 2019 and is about Saeed Jones talking about what it means to be Black and gay in America. This is such an honest and open and generous memoir where Saeed Jones kind of picks different moments in his life. You're kind of following him from the 90s. We started in 1998 and we follow his life. He just kind of picks different kind of vignettes from his life from 1998 all the way up to about 2010-ish that kind of helped develop him as a person. This is about him discovering his sexuality, the kind of issues and like hurdles he faced in that, but then also the joy and beauty of self-discovery in that. And the relationship between him and his mother and the relationship between him and his grandmother is talked about in this. Him in college, where he's kind of, you know, opening up and exploring a lot more. Him facing like a hate crime, essentially. He was like almost murdered at one point in his life. And yeah, this was absolutely beautiful. I listened to part of this on audio, and the audiobook again is narrated by Saeed Jones, which just adds another layer of intimacy to this. I absolutely loved that. I kind of went back and forth between the book and the physical book and the audiobook, and recommend that if you can get this on Scribd. Highly, highly recommend this. It made me cry. It was so emotional. He was so generous in what he tells you. He brings you into such like intimate moments in his life with such an openness and with such honesty that it just felt like a gift to be able to be there and to be able to be a part of that journey with him. I absolutely loved this. A lot of great conversations about family, about queerness in America, being Black and queer in America, and just a coming of age story of a man's life. Highly, highly recommend. Gave this 5 stars. So there you have it. Those are the 12 books that I read in the month of July. I just want to thank again Noria at Noria Reads for hosting the Fuckathon. I read so many excellent books because of that readathon, so thank you. The reading rush was also a lot of fun. I think I read 3 books that kind of overlapped with the reading rush, and I just had a really good time reading. Let me know if you have read any of these books. Let me know if you want to read any of these books. Let me know what you read in July. Thanks for being here, pals. You guys are just the best, and I love hanging out with you all. So until next time, I'll see you, pals.